So as Melissa said, I am the chapter director for the Pennsylvania chapter of Sierra Club, and I'm based in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Tonight, I'm really kind of wearing a different hat. I was the Clean Energy Program Director for the chapter, and before that, worked for the Beyond Coal campaign, trying to transition dirty fossil fuel plants to clean energy, and so I'm kind of I consider myself kind of an energy nerd, and presenting from that perspective here. Let's see. Am I able to advance the slides? Next slide, whoever's here. Okay, thank you. So we're going to start with a little bit of overview of hydrogen as an energy issue to level set. Back to high school chemistry class. So hydrogen is the simplest element in the universe, the most abundant element in the universe, just a single proton electron. Bonds to itself, and for the purposes of this discussion, we're talking about hydrogen molecules, or H2, so you'll see that abbreviation throughout. The conventional wisdom is that it does not exist in nature in any kind of economically recoverable amounts. However, there is actually some emerging research that might indicate that that is wrong, which would really kind of change this conversation. I've included a link here from a science article earlier this year if you want to go down that rabbit hole. But there are still no economically profitable operations of hydrogen extraction happening, although there do seem to be some areas where it can naturally occur and be trapped somewhere under the surface. For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to talk about making hydrogen. And so because we are generally speaking making it under the current paradigm, it's not really an energy source. It's really a mode of storing energy, because it actually takes more energy to make it than is actually contained in the molecule itself. So why we care? We want to transition to 100% clean energy. And so this diagram kind of gives an example. Let me go back to the slide with the house. There we go. So this slide shows an example of a residence that is powered by solar energy and running all of its appliances, its heating and cooling, and its vehicles using electricity generated from clean sources. That's the ideal. However, we do have issues when we get that out to scale as we start to approach close to that 100% threshold. Next slide, please. So we know that the sun doesn't shine all the time. We know that the wind's not always blowing strongly, and demand does fluctuate for electricity. And even though you can power the vast majority of your electrical needs through renewable energy and do things to move, shift your demand to match your supply, in order to really get to 100% clean without any kind of storage, you do potentially have to massively overbuild your clean energy so that you're usually overproducing it and kind of wasting it. And so if we can have cost-effective storage of that, we can, it's less costly to build out that clean energy. And there's also different end uses that are not terribly easy to electrify. They may require extreme energy intensity, like steel making. They may be end uses that can't really be grid connected, or for which batteries are impractical, and that can include commercial aviation, maritime shipping. And there's also a lot of build out of the electrical infrastructure that needs to happen and that's going to take time and money. And so a lot of people are looking to hydrogen in this context as a potential solution to some of those problems, because it can be used in many ways like natural gas can be, but does not have direct emissions of CO2 like methane does. Emphasis on that word direct. I have this Swiss Army knife picture because a lot of people refer to it as the Swiss Army knife of energy. I believe that is a myth and a misnomer, and we'll get into that. That's, you know, a lot of people with Pollyannish glasses on think of it that way. Next slide. Okay, so the colors of hydrogen. So a lot of people hear of different, you know, references to hydrogen with colors in front of it. And so I'm going to go through some of the most common ones and what they mean. So gray hydrogen is mostly what we have today. This is usually formed by a process called steam reformation, where you feed in methane gas and water into a facility that strips off the hydrogen, emits CO2 in the process. There's also an intermediate step where it creates carbon monoxide and then reforms the carbon monoxide into carbon dioxide. There's a lot of emissions involved in this. Anything that involves methane obviously has upstream methane leaks, which are problematic for the climate, but then the direct emissions of these plants are akin to essentially burning gasoline on a equivalent energy basis. This is mostly used currently for industrial processes. Fertilizer production uses a lot of hydrogen. And it does create a lot of emissions, similar to that of the current aviation sector. Next slide. So blue hydrogen is basically the same thing as gray hydrogen, but with an additional step on the end, and that is a process that removes CO2 from the emission stream and injects it underground and stores it. So that process of carbon capture is not 100% efficient. It can potentially get pretty close to that, but probably in the 90s is the best you're going to get. The keys here, though, from a climate perspective, are that even if you were to capture 100% of that carbon dioxide, and even if you were able to store it safely in perpetuity, you still have all of those upstream methane leaks to contend with. And we are not really certain how to properly and safely and permanently store underground. I think there's a lot that remains to be learned about how the geology works, how the processes works, and the ways that they can fail. And as we've seen with the fracking industry, in theory, you shouldn't get a migration of methane. That's what we were told all along, and yet the wells fail. The concrete doesn't always hold up, and things that are not supposed to happen actually do happen. Next slide. Okay, so then there's green hydrogen, and this is an entirely different process. It's called electrolysis, where you use electricity to split water into oxygen and hydrogen. If it uses renewable energy, it's considered green, but you can use electricity from other sources, obviously, and if it uses nuclear power, it is generally called pink, and yellow if it uses the grid mix. Now, the thing about electrolysis is that you do have significant energy conversion losses here. And so if you can use that electricity directly to power the end use, you should. It's much cheaper that way. However, this green hydrogen process does have some value, we think, to produce hydrogen if that hydrogen is going to be used in those hard to decarbonize sectors only. Next slide. All right, so in terms of, I'm running a little bit slow here, so I'll try to pick it up. In terms of federal policy, a lot has happened in the last 18 months. So we had the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that passed that created this grant program that the DOE, the Department of Energy, administers for what's called regional clean hydrogen hubs. That's $8 billion. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the Pennsylvania specific proposals in a bit. There is a requirement that the hydrogen, if it is blue hydrogen, use carbon capture. So there's a standard in terms of how carbon intense that can be. It's 4 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen. That's a fairly stringent standard, but again, doesn't fully account for, we think, the upstream methane leaks. And then we have the Inflation Reduction Act that included an investment tax credit for hydrogen. So that's a tax credit on the capital that you use to build projects of 30% of total expenditures if it's a green hydrogen project, stepping down to 6 if it's blue. And then a production tax credit of $3 per kilogram of green hydrogen produced, stepping down to about 60 cents per kilogram for blue. And this is intended to account for the fact that green hydrogen production is currently much more expensive than other ways of producing hydrogen. Then there's a related tax credit for carbon sequestration that can be used for the production of blue hydrogen, but also for any other type of carbon sequestration. It doesn't have to be hydrogen related. But we think that all told, the value of these tax credits is probably going to be perhaps orders of magnitude higher in total dollar value than the grants for the hydrogen hubs. And a lot rides on IRS guidelines. I've included a link in here that you can click once the presentation goes around, detailing how the IRS needs to put guardrails on what's considered green hydrogen in order to avoid spending money to actually emit more CO2 than we currently emit. Next slide. Okay, so switching gears quickly to the state perspective. I've termed this a bipartisan love fest. Don't Google that term. I ended up settling on a Josh Shapiro picture because during his budget address, he mentioned energy hardly at all, but really talked about his intense desire to get at least one hydrogen hub. The Republicans love this because it's a way for methane in particular to have a path forward in a carbon constrained world, and the Democrats love it because the trade unions love it because there's a lot of construction jobs. That's the primary thing, and also that it enjoys this aura of climate friendliness. And part of what we're trying to do is poke holes in that when it's being used for greenwashing. Next slide. All right, and there is lots of legislation. I had to pick this picture because my daughter was just in the Schoolhouse Rock Live play, so that was very much on my mind. But we had a bill that passed last November that was a $2 billion tax credit that was negotiated largely in secret, wasn't unveiled until the very end, no hearings. It was supposed to be for hydrogen production, but it's the safeguards in terms of what qualifies are so weak that it could almost entirely go toward just using methane in industrial processes. Then we have bills that would attempt to move control of permitting from the EPA where it currently is. This is for injecting CO2 into storage locations, the injection wells, moving that under state control. And then another package which is broader than that, which is still in the works and about to be reintroduced, that would regulate the entire process of carbon sequestration from permitting to basically long-term liability and making sure that things are safe over time. A lot of uncertainty there. So we're really trying to point out what we don't already know and where the possible failure points are along the way. We can maybe get into some of that in the Q&A if we need to. Next slide, please. Okay, and then this is my last one. This is the 3 hydrogen hub proposals, 2 of which would rely almost entirely on blue hydrogen. That is the Decarbonization Network of Appalachia Hub and the Appalachian Regional Clean Hydrogen Hub. They love the use of clever acronyms here. So the DNA Hub is actually, the state is actually a partner in that through a nonprofit called Team PA. That also includes major gas players, Shell and Equinor. U.S. Steel is part of this, and they want to find ways to decarbonize the steel making process, replacing coke with hydrogen. And then there's the Mid-Atlantic Clean Hydrogen Hub, which I will not talk at all about because Ginny is going to give you more information on that. So I will turn it over.
Thank you, Tom. My name is Ginny Marcille-Kerlaske, and I'm the Eastern Pennsylvania organizer for Food and Water Watch. Welcome to everyone here. Shout out to some of my fellow Chester County residents that I see in the group, but everybody, thank you for being here tonight. I live in Exton, PA, in West Whiteland Township in Chester County, and I got very involved in all of this when the Mariner East pipeline rolled into town back in 2017, and I'll talk more about that later on how that's had an impact and going forward on this sort of development. So if we could have the next slide, I can get going on it. So I'm going to talk some more, take a look at a proposed hydrogen hub right here in southeastern Pennsylvania that you may not have heard of before tonight because it's managing to fly under the radar. It's called MACH2, which stands for Mid-Atlantic Clean Hydrogen Hub. And it involves southeastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. It's one of 3 hydrogen hub applications that Tom just mentioned from Pennsylvania, competing with others for funding under the IRA. And it's one of 33 from across the country that received letters of recommendation, letters of encouragement from the Department of Energy last year. The final applications have been submitted to the DOE, and announcements are expected on who's going to get the money in October. Originally, there were to be 4 to 6 hydrogen hubs across the country, but lobbying from the fossil fuel industry and others increased that up to 11 hydrogen hubs. Next slide. So MACH2 is an interconnected web of over 30 producers, consumers, and transporters of hydrogen and carbon dioxide. It's estimated to be a $4.6 billion project and relies on $900 million in IRA funds and additional state subsidies. And while it's being promoted as clean with an emphasis on green hydrogen, MACH2 actually relies heavily on hydrogen from fracked methane with carbon capture, which all of you know now is called blue hydrogen. Next slide, please. So not only would MACH2 prolong fracking in Pennsylvania, it would mean the build out of even more fossil fuel infrastructure, including blue hydrogen power plants, which are anything but clean, and the construction of pipelines to transport hydrogen to the users and CO2 for use or sequestration underground. An abstract prepared by the MACH2 team states that all the pipelines considered have permanent easements and will either be replaced, modified, or undergo new line installation within the easement. So what this means is that if you have a transmission pipeline easement on your property or through your community in this region, you could be facing more pipeline construction and the operation of dangerous, unregulated CO2 pipelines. I'll take the next slide, please. So who is MACH2? This is, as this detective shows, just how hard it is to find the clues to who's involved here. Only a handful of companies have been publicly named. SEPTA, Delta, Philadelphia Gas Works are really the only few that I've heard talk about in public. But through some digging, some private conversations, and a private meeting that I was able to get into unnoticed back in February, it is known who some of the oil and gas and pipeline companies are, which makes the blue hydrogen aspect of this very clear. Some are named in this quote that I've put here that came from one of the founding members of MACH2 in an obscure labor and energy podcast that I found from late last year. And he said, and I quote, "Some of the major players that are part of this are PBG, Monroe, Energy Transfer, New Fortress." And then on top of this, we know that the former senior VP of Energy Transfer throughout all the Mariner East construction years, 2014 to 2021, is a core team member of MACH2. Next slide, please. So it's not surprising that Energy Transfer's involvement in MACH2 is being kept quiet because it presents certain problems. The construction of Mariner East and Revolution pipelines resulted in over 50 charges for environmental crimes from attorney Josh Shapiro. When those cases against Energy Transfer were settled last August, Shapiro had strong words, and I put them on this slide. Every time Energy Transfer bids for a new project here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania or somewhere across the country, their criminal conduct will stick with them forever. So obviously this presents a problem for now Governor Shapiro, who has voiced his support for MACH2 and the other hydrogen hubs, and it presents a problem for MACH2. Next slide, please. Another problem for MACH2 is that Energy Transfer's Mariner East construction left in its wake widespread entrenched public opposition to pipeline construction across Pennsylvania, and especially in Chester and Delaware County, which MACH2 will have to cross through. It has resulted in an awareness of public safety impact that certain pipelines present. And this public opposition not only presents an obstacle to obtaining the necessary permits and approvals that MACH2 will need, but also the funding from the DOE that it needs. Next slide, please. This is because the federal government wants to see positive community engagement and is factoring this into their decision-making in awarding the IRA funds, stating, and I put this up here, the last thing we want to see at the DOE is billions of dollars of our precious hydrogen hub capital not deployed because an otherwise worthy project ran into entrenched opposition from local communities, which had been disregarded during this process. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share a story with you about how public opposition stopped a hydrogen plant earlier this year from progressing in West Whiteland Township, where I live. And this power plant was, or likely still is, a part of MACH2 for the simple reason that it doesn't make much sense without government funding, and also because of some of the other players that are in the background of this. So this is the end of my slides, but I thought I would just tell you this story. It's a pretty good one, and it gives people a lot of hope and an example of what you can do. So back in December, I happened to notice in my township's Board of Supervisors agenda for a meeting on December the 21st, that there was a zoning ordinance text amendment that was being considered. A developer had submitted an application to allow data centers and power generating facilities in our office laboratory district. Because they're not named in the zoning ordinance, they are, by law, they have to be held somewhere, so they go into the industrial district. So I thought, well, this doesn't look good. So I went to the meeting along with my friend Libby, who I see as a participant here today, and another community member. And we started asking questions, and we expressed concerns about the data center primarily because the scale of one that he was putting in the neighboring township and was considered, in a press release, he mentioned that was going to be in our township, was very concerning. This is like a hyperscale data center where in other states they're seeing problems. And then we had questions about the generating facility, but we weren't getting any answers. There were no plans submitted with this application. And yet our supervisors voted unanimously to move this forward to a public hearing on the text amendment, on the zoning ordinance amendment for January 25th. So the developer who was at the meeting said to me and to Libby, why don't you guys come out to the site? I'll show you what I'm going to do, and you're going to feel good about this. Well, I'm so grateful that we took him up on that offer because we learned everything we needed to know about this bad plan. And so we went. That was January 5th. I took a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer with me. My friend Libby came along, and during that site visit, it became clear to us that what he really planned to do was to build a hydrogen power plant on that property in West Whiteland Township that neighbors his hyperscale data center, like 2 million square foot data center that he's hoping to build in East Whiteland Township. So we knew this would be a bad plan. I should also mention, and you can see in this picture here, I'll just explain. You can see some houses there in the background. That's a neighborhood. The power plant would pretty much be right across, just to the right of that, in that open space where that taller tree is. And where this couple here is walking, that is like I think it's a 700-acre park called Exton Park, and it is a treasure in our township and actually in our county, which is, our township is very developed, and it's like this treasure that we can go to and enjoy. There's a Chester Valley Trail loops through it, so it's not just the local residents but lots of people. So set to work, formed a Facebook group called Protect Exton Park, and I created a petition to tell the supervisors to vote no. And Libby and I went out to the park on the weekend and handed out flyers, getting people to sign the petition and make a plan to attend the hearing on January 25th. And we quickly got over 300 people joined the group with almost 500 signatures on this petition. This all happened in a matter of about a week. And then an article came out about it in the Philadelphia Inquirer and in our local paper, the Daily Local News. And long story short, the developer ended up pulling his application for the zoning ordinance amendment, and the hearing was canceled. And that's simply because there was so much public opposition to it. We were going to be packing the hearing. Hopefully the supervisors would listen to us and vote no. He wasn't going to get this through in this manner. And the other part of it was that press attention on hydrogen was something that these people do not want. So we were able to stop something. It was like a Trojan horse, this data center plan in West Whiteland. It would have opened the door wide open to a hydrogen power plant being able to be put there. Somebody wrote, "Good job, Ginny." I have to stress, it wasn't just me. One person making that noise does make a difference, but people here cared enough to stop their busy lives and sign a petition and make a plan and tell their neighbors. And it was a beautiful thing to see. So thank you. And I pass it off to the next speaker.
All right. Hi, everyone. That is a great note to transition us to our action steps, right? So I'm sure all of you are asking how you can get involved in this hydrogen energy debate. We're going to go through both what actions you can take with Sierra Club Pennsylvania, and then Ginny is going to present action steps with Food and Water Watch. So if something resonates with you, just pay attention to which organization you're going to be directing your energy afterwards, right? And of course, all of these will have links and resources that will go out in the follow-up email. So I'm going to pass it back over to Tom now for our Sierra Club action steps.
Yeah, so thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Ginny. And I just want to, before I just cover this, I want to lift up something that Kip said in the chat. From my perspective, blue hydrogen is a fake, more efficient to use methane directly, and that is actually true from a power plant standpoint, right? Like you actually have more net life cycle CO2 emissions if you create blue hydrogen and then burn the hydrogen in the power plant. There is, I think, one, as far as I can tell, there's at least one use that where blue hydrogen makes sense, and that is direct reduction of iron to make in the steel making process. So replacing coke with blue hydrogen probably has an environmental benefit. The amount that you would use for that is far less than, and it doesn't require an entire hub. But that is one thing I wanted to flag. In terms of taking action, so we're at the early stages of this, right? As you can probably tell, there's a lot of education that needs to happen. There's a lot of myths out there, and part of it is just clearing those up, right? And kind of scraping away the green veneer that doesn't necessarily hold up to scrutiny when a lot of these projects are created. A lot of these projects are kind of surfacing here and there. I just heard about another one today in Clinton County. And so the main thing that we're asking right now is for people to sign up using this link to get further updates. It's just been pasted in the chat. We are looking at potentially starting up a statewide Sierra Club Pennsylvania team on hydrogen. That team doesn't exist yet, but right now we're trying to collect names of folks who are interested, and as new information comes to light, we will share it with you, and we will share opportunities for you to get involved on specific decision points as they arise. And that's what I have for my slide.
Okay, I will add to that. We have some ideas from Food and Water Watch. First of all, you can sign up now to write a personal letter to the Department of Energy opposing blue hydrogen in Pennsylvania. There's a link here, and you're going to be getting, I think, in the chat, but also through when you get this slide deck, you can just click on that. That will allow you to sign up, and then you will receive the easy instructions on how to do this, along with talking points. This is a tactic that we're going to be taking because you remember in my presentation, I said how the DOE is factoring positive public engagement on this, and they don't want to award projects where they're going to face entrenched public opposition. So let's tell them there's going to be entrenched public opposition for MACH2 or any of the others in Western PA. So anyone across the state can participate in this, and we're hoping to flood the Department of Energy with letters about this, because right now they're hearing from legislators and industry people about how great this is going to be for our communities, and it's not. And then another thing you can do is advocate for local ordinances for CO2 pipelines. This is a unique opportunity with these pipelines because there are no federal regulations for CO2 pipelines, and there's no state regulations. So we have the ability to do this. And this is something that they're already doing in places like Iowa and Nebraska for CO2 pipelines. And I just looked up how many, what we're looking at, and it's like There was one estimate that the DOE says we're going to need 50,000 miles of new CO2 pipelines in the US for carbon capture. So, you know, this is, if we can put ordinances in place with setbacks or different requirements that make this harder to do, they're not going to be able to put them through communities, and that'll break the whole chain. And finally, you can be a watchdog in your own community for potential hydrogen hub infrastructure development, especially if you live in southeastern Pennsylvania near some of these pipelines. Watch for things, keep an eye on what's happening within your local government for ordinance changes, zoning ordinance changes, like, you know, what I and Libby noticed here in West Whiteland. And, you know, watch for these things because they are setting the groundwork in anticipation of these things getting funding and moving forward. Thank you.
Through the Clean Energy for All series, we are collecting energy stories. So these can be about the impact that you think that hydrogen will have on you. This can be about any other aspect of energy policy in Pennsylvania. We're collecting these because we want to hear about which issues you care about. We want to amplify good work that may be happening in your communities. It's going to help us guide future topics and speakers. And we may even feature your story in a social media event. You can also use this if you want to share something with Sierra Club, you're looking for a solution, you have a question, you can go ahead and use this format anytime. We also have conservation teams that meet regularly. So there's two teams, one is focused on clean energy, one is focused on dirty energy. These, of course, are hydrogen kind of falls in, we could show up to either of these and talk about hydrogen, right? These are led by our wonderful volunteer leaders. You can go ahead and sign up for those future meetings at the links in the chat. We encourage you to check in on those. Those are great ways to get involved. And then we also have a grassroots power building team that meets once a month. This is very activist action focused. We talk about all environmental issues across the state. We do things like write letters to the editor, phone banking, text banking. It's really an open space. So do feel free. Our next meeting is coming up on Monday, May 1st. So we hope to see you at that. And then, oh yeah, I don't want to miss that. Our next Clean Energy for All event is going to be on Thursday, June 29th. Right now, the title is Energy Evolution at Home, but that could change because we just floated that idea today. But the topic will be about energy issues related to your home, right? Weatherization, repair, retrofitting buildings, maximizing efficiency and limiting consumption, electrification, housing justice, making sure that these updates are affordable and accessible. We're going to be hearing from the Here for CJ Coalition out of Philadelphia about their work on equity and housing justice. That form is available for you to sign up now. So do feel free to sign up if you know exactly where you're going to be on Thursday, June 9th, 2 whole months from now. I hope you'll check that out. And then finally, I'm going to throw it over to Kelsey, who you haven't had a chance to hear from tonight, who has a somewhat completely unrelated topic to talk about, but it is still energy and it is still really, really important. So we need your attention on this as well. So Kelsey, go for it for real quick, and then we'll hit our discussion period.
Kelsey Krebs, I'm the senior campaign rep with the Dirty Fuels campaign here in Pennsylvania. I've been doing a lot of work recently on orphan and abandoned wells. And really, I just wanted to put a plug in here, pun intended, that if y'all are interested in this topic, have done work on this topic, and or would like to coordinate with me on this particular topic and work, I'd really love for you to connect with me and send me an email. We're doing a lot of different pieces of that puzzle, and yeah, just reaching out would be great to get connected. So I will be quick with that and turn it back over to Melissa.
All right, and thank you, Kelsey. Do we have questions in the chat, Kelsey, that we should address first?
Yeah, there is a question related to the one that Tom was talking about with blue hydrogen from before, but this is also from Kip. And in Japan, there is a CO2-based industrial park surrounding a power plant that captures CO2 and pipes it to surrounding greenhouses, aquaculture, and a beer manufacturing plant. Kip is asking if y'all are aware of this plant.
I am not aware of it, but I think that there's definitely reason to look into how CO2 could be used locally. The transportation thing is troubling. Unlike gas pipelines, which could be explosive if they rupture, CO2 is not flammable, but it is an asphyxiant. And even though there's not that many CO2 pipelines currently, the idea that you could have a leak that goes undetected and you could have all the CO2 leaking out that doesn't really readily dissipate if it's kind of in a valley without a lot of wind, it can literally choke people to death. And there was almost a mass casualty event in Mississippi not too long ago. So there are definitely dangers involved, even though people don't necessarily think of CO2 as being terribly toxic. It can be in high enough concentrations.
Lisa, I have you next on stack.
Where'd you go?
Might have just lowered.
Lisa, you may be on mute if you're trying to talk.
Sorry, I must have hit it again. Okay, so a question is for Ginny. I live in West Goshen Township, and I've learned from fighting for open space issues to go onto the township's website, and they usually post their township meetings, the agendas. But does she have any other tips for trying to find out if there are any development plans for these types of plants in the area? It's not always apparent to me when you go onto the township website that you would uncover such things.
Yeah, that's a great question, Lisa. And for those who don't know, Lisa is in the neighboring township to mine. Mariner East cuts through West Goshen Township. So this would be another key area to look at. Plus, you've got other pipelines too that they could use. That's where I generally go. I look at not just the supervisors meetings, but the zoning hearing board, which is a quasi judicial, like they're separate, they make their own decisions, and also the planning commission. So checking all those things, but then even just being a watchdog in your community around the pipelines, or West Goshen has the pump station. If you're seeing new activity there on the easements or at the pump station, or if you see any sort of new industry going in that sort of raises concerns, that would be something to start paying attention to. And Lisa, feel free to reach out to me anytime to anybody here. If they see something like that, get in touch and we'll try to help see if there's something there. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Libby said that Tom answered the question.
Can I play off of something Tom said if we have a break in questions right now?
We have one comment here, I think that would be helpful to lift up, just from my point of view, to create storage cells. If we can get electrolysis going on a large scale basis and use renewable for powering the conversion, then it is worth using the extra power to make the conversions from coming from KIP. Any feedback or comments from that or discussion, y'all?
Yeah, so in my mind, that is one of the best uses of hydrogen. And so we have, there are places in the country, notably West Texas, where we frequently have more renewable energy than we can use. And currently what happens is that we end up actually kind of, it's called spilling, we end up basically sort of like disengaging the turbines when we don't need them from the grid, so that they don't create overload issues, and which is, you know, kind of a shame because like the energy is there, we're just not able to use it. And so ideally what we'd be able to do is when there is more renewable energy than we need, and I think we'll get to that point with solar at some point in the middle of the day, where you can use the excess to make hydrogen, store it, and then use it later when you need it. And you can potentially store it over longer periods of time than you can use a battery to store something. And it may end up being cheaper than batteries. That kind of remains to be seen. But I think that has the most potential. We're nowhere near that here now, right? We only get in state, we only get 3% of our electricity from renewable energy in Pennsylvania. So we have a long way to go before we're ever going to have an excess of renewable energy. But in some of the less populated Midwestern states, they're already there.
And we shouldn't be using that limited amount of renewables to generate green hydrogen in Pennsylvania. Wasting it.
Yeah, that's right. We would use it when we have too much, but not until then.
Ginny, if you want to go ahead with the other comment you were going to make, I'm not seeing any other hands raised right now.
Sure, I was just going to add to, so Tom had said about CO2 pipelines and the near fatal incident in Mississippi. I believe that was in 2020. When incidents like that and the dangers of CO2 pipelines is especially frightening for communities in like Chester and Delaware County again, which would be involved with MACH2 because we are so densely populated. Much like Mariner East, if there's a leak on Mariner East, it would be catastrophic. A leak on a CO2 pipeline here could be catastrophic. Emergency vehicles, if they're not electric, stop. People can be asphyxiated, they can die. So these are, you cannot stress enough how CO2 pipelines, we don't think of CO2 as being so dangerous, but it really is when you put in a pipeline and it leaks, and they are at the moment totally unregulated, and we could face them before there are regulations. So that's why this local ordinance work could be very helpful.
Yeah, so I got a question as a direct message that I'm not sure if it was intended to be a direct message, but I'll answer it to the group anyway. It says, is there such a thing as good green hydrogen production processes? So green hydrogen production, because it uses renewable energy, does not create pollution by itself, and the reason why it would be potentially wasteful is because, if you're using renewable energy to create hydrogen and then you're using the hydrogen to do something that you could have done with the renewable energy in the first place, you're just wasting renewable energy. And so the key there is, what are you using the hydrogen for? Are you using the hydrogen to displace something that is worse than, in terms of pollution, than the average grid mix of electricity, right? And if that's the case, then it's potentially a good thing. But most of the proposed uses are not that, right? And so I think the storage example of excess green energy that I mentioned before is a good one. I think that there are potentially certain industrial processes that utilize hydrogen, where if we substituted green hydrogen for what's currently gray hydrogen, that would be good for the climate. But those are not energy uses. Those are uses where the hydrogen is actually part of a chemical process, right? And so I can see that as a good use in the short term as well. Those are a couple of examples. I think in the long run, we're talking about things like aviation, maybe long haul trucking, because I'm not totally convinced that battery electric semi-tractor trailer trucks are really ever going to cut the mustard. It depends. It depends on how the technology evolves, but I'm skeptical. We might need hydrogen for that.
Libby is on staff with a raised hand. Libby?
Hi, excuse me. I am just wondering what kind of regulations on carbon capture besides setback could possibly help to make it safer? I don't know if Ginny might have an answer for that, or maybe Tom.
Well, so the link that that you've got for the CO2 ordinance work takes you to a booklet that has a lot of this stuff laid out. It's been put out by Bold, Nebraska, and it's got sample ordinances in it. So it's not like if you're going to do this, you have to start from scratch. Libby, some of it is, that's a great question, because it's kind of like what we say with Mariners, like, what could you possibly do aside from not have it in the first place? And that's kind of what these CO2 ordinances are. They stop it from even happening in the first place, because if you have a setback, it can be a reasonable setback that's allowed, but it just means that there's no room to put it through, especially if you're in a densely populated, high consequence area. So stopping it makes it safe. I guess that's the answer. There could be some detection. There could be possibly some requirements for the type of pipes that are being used. I'm not sure if all of those things are laid out there, but a big push on that is just on the ordinances, just stopping it to begin with, to be honest, but in a legal way.
I know that our local state representative, Danielle Friel-Otten, had pushed for setbacks in one case. And if we figure out some of these regulations that might seem like common sense to other people, but we know when we set them out or when we're pushing for them that they would make it impossible. I think about the nursing home situation where they had to come up with a safe evacuation plan before they built. Same kind of thing. Like if we push for those and we get them approved and somebody says, okay, we'll do that. That seems reasonable. But we know, so I guess my thoughts are is what can we push for, which will make them not be able to meet their goals?
Yeah, that's essentially what this is. Yeah, reasonable things that, because it would, at the end of the day, it would be unreasonable. It would be unsafe to put it there because they can't meet these very reasonable requirements. Like having an effective emergency plan, having a proper setback. And if you can't do those things, it shouldn't go there. You'd think our laws were set up for that, our regulations were, but they're not. And we do have the opportunity right now, as long as they don't have federal or state regulations, we have the ability within our own townships to put that in place.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that book that you're linked to, that guide, they actually have those sample ordinances. And to let people know, there are a couple townships here in Chester County that actually are already starting to consider doing this at very early stages, but they're interested. So
great. Thanks, Ginny.
Lifting up the last question here that I see in the chat from Lisa, of large companies that want to build hydrogen hubs have big bucks behind them and conduct slick marketing campaigns, and this sways the public. So how do you combat that with a limited budget?
Tom, do you want to take that one? Or
I mean, we're never going to be able to match them dollar for dollar in marketing, right? But we have more people. So it's, I think, all about meeting with decision makers and making sure that they don't fall for it. I think you got to combat money with people power and generally, and we face that issue with a lot of the energy work that we do.
And I think I'd add to that a unique thing to the hydrogen stuff is it really doesn't make environmental sense, but it also doesn't make economic sense. So our government does play a big role in this stuff going forward because it needs these inputs from the government in order to exist. Like if you're not giving them those subsidies, it's just not going to happen. So our voice is amplified on this. We just have to use it, like Tom said.
I will say too that we do have a lot of champions in the Pennsylvania legislature right now who are willing to raise these issues within their caucus, and now at least for the time being, there's a Democrats control the agenda in the House, right? And so we've got people who will listen. I think one of the big issues I mentioned the bill, the $2 billion tax credit that passed last time, right? Like I think that was able to happen because it was negotiated under the radar and negotiated really to get a lot of Democratic support before the public was really like aware of this issue and before a lot of people were paying attention. I don't think a bill like that would sail through as quickly now. And if a tax credit like that did pass, I'm sure there would be a lot more environmental safeguards, right? And so we just got to keep fighting on that education process.
I did at that meeting that I was able to get into unnoticed back in February, I did hear the governor's deputy chief of staff say that they would be trying to expand that tax credit that Tom just referred to because it was only for one hydrogen hub. But now that it looks like Pennsylvania could get more than one, they need to expand that to additional ones. So this is something to pay attention to. It could come up, they could sneak it in anywhere. And, we have to make sure that doesn't happen.
All right. Well, thank you both. We are a little bit past time, so I appreciate everyone who stuck around, all the great questions. Thank you to Ginny and Tom and Kelsey for your input today. It was really great. Again, all of this is going to be going out in an email. If anyone thinks of questions between, now and forever, feel free to shoot us emails. You'll get our contact information in that email as well. So with that, unless there's anything further that anyone wants to add, I wish everyone a wonderful evening.